Well, that was,
Yeah.
yeah, do you remember, we created that, I think, before we did the bid
Yeah.
to, yes,
Right.
yeah, okay.
You know, another, you know, back into, we jumped into to Lufthansa, and then there was also CT3, which reminded me of another oops, where we said rather than this matrix of priority things, we would just list the faces in order, and that's how we would do it. And then I discovered that how do you do that? You can't always do that. And so we had to put some restrictions on that.
That was when we were at GE. That was, I think,
I thought that was the CT3 and the shuttle stuff, or
well, it may have been there too, but I got you in trouble when we were doing NASA 2. The priority scheme.
Oh, maybe that's where it came in.
I think so.
right.
I think it was the NASA. It was the priority.
Oh wait, NASA 2 was the 40 object thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Wasn't that the matrix?
Yeah.
So we did it with a matrix, every object against every other object.
Yes.
Which grew as n squared.
Yes.
And then extending that to future systems.
Oh,
we might
maybe that's what it was.
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably, it's interesting, but I suspect that may not be.
It's too nit of a detail for the
yeah.
technology.
Yeah, I think you need to
Yeah.
have somebody that was interested in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll have to remind us of where we were, but I think we had sort of branched.
They can edit and.
True,
Yeah.
and shuffle it around.
So probably jump in with an
How did-
overview,
Okay, all right. I
start,
think-
and then, and then we'll branch back into.
Alright gents, could I remind you to put it on either airplane mode or off or on silent, please? Preferably off or airplane mode, just so there's no interference.
Sure.
That would be amazing.
Sure. I don't think I have.
If you don't have it on you, then we're totally...
Mine is already off,
it's
and it's
perfect.
back there.
But mine is not off.
Okay.
Barb, would you want?
I'll go
why don't
turn
you
it.
turn it off for me.
He says there's a slight buzzing noise. He's trying to figure out.
A slight what, buzzing?
A slight buzz, yeah.
Oh, really?
So-
Well, it could be coming from that, or it could be coming from the canary stuff.
Well, we didn't hear it in the first part, right?
Oh, you did?
It's still not that prominent, really.
Really?
It's just
Okay.
I'm a nitpicker, so
Yeah.
it's fine.
Okay.
All right.
Because we can unplug the canary things, but we'll have to crank them back up again.
Yeah. It's
No.
fine.
Yeah, okay.
All right, we are good to go.
All right. Well, we're back from a great lunch. Thank you, Barbara, and trying to remember where the heck we were when we left off. Bob reminds me that we had drifted off onto some KR things and the John Warnock and all that. We want to pick up on the thread of the NovaView development, the night-only visual system development, because that was such an important part ongoing in the life of ENS. So what happened there was, as we were working on that idea, the night-only idea at sort of as our introductory thing at ENS, while we're worrying about the KORF contract and things like that, Bob and Ed Cheadle and Aaron Watkins and I and maybe some others, but that mostly was the group, worried about how do you really build a nice low-cost visual system that does night-only simulation that would be competitive with what had been just demonstrated by a company called Conductron, who had developed such a thing, and they had actually sold one to an airline, which had gotten, to everyone's surprise in the simulation community, FAA approval for taking some training out of the airplane and putting it into the simulator. So at that point, that created quite a bit of excitement in the civil airline community, and CAE, that's what it was CAE, was the company I was trying to think of. Air Canada decided they were going to buy 5 of these systems from Conductron. And CAE was a company that was building visual systems, and they were bidding, and they knew about Conductron. They had heard some stuff about ENS doing some graphics simulation at Ames with the standard graphics terminal that ENS was marketing at the time. And they called up and wanted to know if we could do a simulator. And the marketing folks said, well, wait a minute, and they had them talk to me. And so we had a conversation, and they asked if we could do something like that. And I said, I think we can. I think we've been thinking about that, and I believe we can do a better job than, we can make it more competitive than the Conductron system. So they asked us for a bid. We worked really hard, got a bid, ready to go. We were working sort of day and night to make the deadline. In those days, you didn't, send your bid on Dropbox or something. You had to actually physically take the freaking thing and deliver it to the airport, having bought it a ticket, and send it to where it was going. And so we were working on our bid, and it was the day that we had to submit it to take it to the airport. The night before, we were all exhausted, and I said, we're going to go home, let's get a night's sleep, and we'll continue this on Saturday morning, and we'll get it out to the airport. So about 10 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from my boss, who was the manager of marketing for ENS, and he said, I understand from Bryce that you are bidding non-standard ENS hardware on this job, and he says to get in touch with you and say that you're not allowed to submit the bid. And I said, whoa, John, we've been working on this, and our idea is here to build a simulation thing. This is very necessary. Well, he said, Bryce says you can't do it. And I thought, I'm sort of groggy because I hadn't gotten a full night's sleep. And I said, well, I'll tell you, I'll make you a deal. I know you're my boss, but I will not submit that bid under one condition, and that is that I get a call from Dave Evans telling me not to submit the bid. And he said, fair enough, and I hung up and went running into work. We got the team together, submitted the bid, never heard anything more about it. We submitted the bid and we lost. And you might say, oh, isn't that terrible? But it really wasn't, because it was a great exercise. We had never done something like, a bid like that together as a small team. And the ideas were good. We had this design that we thought was good and solid. We had a rough idea about how to price it. We had even done a little market guess about how many of these things we'd sell. And I think
it was sort of like the IBM guess as to how many computers.
Exactly right, Bob. Exactly right. The number that I remember that we chose as our target was, in maybe 5 years, we could probably sell 15 of these in 5 years or something. So anyway, we just tucked it in. We continued to work on the idea. And there's a gentleman named Mike Spooner, who was the head of R&D at Rediffusion.
Redifon.
Redifon then.
Redifon,
yeah. Yes. They were a very well-known simulation company. And Mike would make an annual visit to the United States to see what was going on in the development of high-performance daylight computer graphic simulation.
Something that would compete with their television model systems.
Right.
And provide the same kind of imagery.
Right, and his purpose was not to learn about this stuff in order that they could buy it or something. It was to guarantee that their model board business had a long life. It was not in danger of being replaced by some idea like that. And so he satisfied himself that, that he was like the airlines, come back when you have something that really looks good. So Mike was about to leave. I remember this clearly. It was mid-January. There was snow on the ground. I walked him out to their car in the snow, and he's in the passenger seat, and one of his associates from Redifon, Herb Cools, was the driver. And I said, I told him goodbye and thanked him for coming. I said, before you go though, we didn't talk about night-only simulation. Do you guys have any interest in that sort of technology? And he said, no. We're model board people. This is the way it's going to go. And so I went back in, and I think I probably had mentioned that to Bob, and we said, what do we do? And I said, I think we just sort of keep going on this. We know it's got possibilities. 2 weeks later, the phone rings. It's John Bastow, the marketing guy in Crawley at Redifon, who was going down to pick up an order for 2 camera model board visual systems of the kind that we talked about at lunch. Bob was describing these at lunchtime. And so he went in to pick up his order, and they said, John, this is the KLM guys. John, we're going to actually buy 5 McDonald. At this time, I think McDonald had bought Conductor. And so McDonald was the owner of this technology that had gotten acceptance in one simulator at an airline. And he went in to pick up the order. They said, no, we're going to order 5 of these things. And John called Crawley and said, told him what was happening. And he went back to Crawley, and they called and said, can you guys really do this thing that you mentioned to Mike Spooner and Herbert when they were visiting? And I said, yeah.
Hold up one
Yes.
second. Your glasses.
Oh, are they messing you up? Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, we wouldn't want them to be crossed, right? You're a bigger nitpicker than I am.
Got me, man. Got me.
And that's saying a lot. Okay. Ready? And we can take them off if you want. Oh, they're messing up the speaker or the mic. We can take them
No,
off.
that's totally cool right
Okay.
there.
All right.
Yeah. It was just that one bit.
Okay.
All right.
So they made this call and said, can you do it? And I said, yeah. We're coming over. We'll meet you. They had an office in Arlington, Texas, where they served American Airlines, which was a big customer of the model board systems. We want to meet you for dinner down here. Can you make it? And I said, sure. So we went down, had a nice dinner, talked about ideas, talked about their marketing strategy for this stuff, and said, we're forming a team to go into Northern Europe. We're going to be going to KLM and the other airlines that are in that Northern European consortium. There were 5, I think, right? Air France and
SAS and UTA.
Yes. Swiss Air.
Swiss Air,
Yeah, KSSU. It was
Yeah.
KSSU group. Okay. So we're going to go around there. We want you to come over and tour with us. And we're going to go talk about visual systems, and we're going to talk about computer-generated systems. And so I went, and I said, yeah, we'll do that. And I went. And we had this great visit, and all the airlines were interested and so forth. And so I came back to the States. And John Bastow then, who had picked up or had the marketing responsibility at KLM, called one Monday morning. We were in our staff meeting, Dave's staff meeting, and John called and I got the secretary came in and said, this guy's on the phone, he wants to talk to you. And I said, well, it's we're in Dave's staff meeting. I'd rather not be interrupted. Who is it? And she said, it's John Bastow. I'll come. So
I'll be interrupted.
I'll be interrupted. So I went out and John says, Rod, I've got a few questions for you. I'm at KLM now, and these guys have got some questions about the system, you know, and the thing you guys are, they were working on their proposal. And I said, well, okay, shoot, what's the first question? And he said, they want to know how it works. And I said, and he said, and I need this now because I'm going into a meeting tomorrow morning at KLM. I'm there, and we're going to have a meeting there to talk about the answers. And I said, John, I'm coming. So I called Carol, and I said, would you pack my bag, get my passport, get me some traveler's checks, and meet me, drop it off at E&S. And I got tickets and so forth. And Bob, I think that's the time when we decided the best thing to do was we needed to have some discussions, and I wanted to make sure I really understood this stuff. And so Bob drove me out to the airport, and on the way he was briefing me and so forth. We had a little sketch, a little piece of paper, and we went. And I got there that morning. John took me to his hotel and threw me in the shower and revived me, and we made this 9 o'clock meeting, and he propped me up in front of these guys, and we went till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And fortunately, I was able to stay awake, and we got the questions answered. And I won't drag you through all the details after that, but that did it. And they got the order, and then they wanted to come over and meet us and find out if we were a real company, and they wanted to see our production schedule. Well, we didn't even, we had no clue about what the production schedule was going to be like because we hadn't actually detailed the design. We had the concept. And so Jack Halverson, who was the manager of engineering, he was starting to use PERT charts in the work there, and he generated this PERT chart that got printed out on a line printer.
Well, it was a big drafting printer, it was about
Huge
that wide
thing.
or
Oh,
something.
huge, yes, huge. And he came, and so I said, Jack, I called him from there, and I said, they want to see this, and they're coming, they're going to come over and find out if we're for real. Do a PERT chart for this thing. And he did. And he came in, we had the meeting with him, very cordial. They went through a lot of stuff. Bob, we were all there. And we invited Jack to come in and give him the PERT schedule, which he did. And we won the contract. and so then we had to do it, which we did.
I don't know where he got the inputs or the outputs for that PERT chart.
It was beautiful. Whatever,
It
didn't
looked
matter.
beautiful, had nothing to do with reality.
It didn't matter, and I think, those guys were not fools. I bet you they probably knew exactly what was done.
Well, they were good,
But
down-to-earth
they were
Dutch.
good, well, I think they were
engineers.
good judges of human beings. I think good judges of human nature, and I think one of the things that we've been successful at, I think, is establishing a rapport with customers where they trust us. They know, we admit our mistakes before they know we've made mistakes, but we've never left them in the lurch. So anyway, we got the contract.
We were over in the old nurses' barracks, over on the university campus there. There were holes in the floor,
Yes.
little appendages stuck out there of trailers to do work in. And,
Yeah.
it was not exactly your
Not
high-tech,
ideal.
clean,
Not
9001 certified facility.
Not ideal at all, but it worked. It did work. So we made it on time. And I think the next thing I'd like to have us do is cover, there were some other human nature kind of things that have a strong technological base that arose out of that work. The pilot, yes.
Sorry, 1 sec.
So
In
it
the
was
spring.
the spring of '73, delivery in November. We made the delivery. We discussed at breakfast time the acceptance test period, but I didn't cover some of the human interest kind of things. The one of them was a technical issue. We went through the acceptance, and they really did like what they saw, but as we were looking at the landing sequences, they noticed that, and we had noticed this too, they noticed that the images of the runway lights appear, as you came in, they appeared double.
They would start to separate, and the separation would get bigger as you got closer to them.
Right. And they're scratching their heads saying, well, it doesn't look like that. And we said, we'll bet it doesn't. But why does this happen? And we, at that moment, didn't know. But later on, you learn that Bob Schumacher once again came to the rescue. So we finished the test, and that was one that we were hung up on. So I suggested, look, it's getting dark. Let's go have supper. If you want to get some sleep and come back tomorrow, let's do that. But we need to reconnoiter on this problem and see what's going on. So we went. Oh, and one other complaint they had was Bob had described the system, and one of the features it had, besides the lights, was a horizon band that as the airplane rolled. The horizon band would roll, and it tapered to dark in, maybe, what was it, maybe 10% of the height of the rest or something. Yeah. And so it tapered dark, and we colored it sort of a sunset orange color. And they said in the review, before we left for dinner, they said, we really don't like your horizon band. We understand why it's there. We understand it gives us cues, but it doesn't look like that. And so we opened the trailer door, which faced west. They stepped out, and the sun had set. And there was this horizon band going along there, colored, and they stopped dead in their tracks and said, you guys set this up. Yeah. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? So back to the problem. We had dinner. We were all going to head home. Bob said, I got to go back. We got to go figure this out. And I think during dinner, you'd actually figured it out during dinner. Why don't you take it from there and explain?
Well, yeah. In retrospect, it was fairly simple. We were updating the image at 30 times a second and displaying it at 60 times a second. And so the same position was displayed twice, but the airplane had moved and your eye would track, and between those you got this separation of the lights. So the solution was simple. All you had to do was double a computation.
Right, and double the price.
And I said,
double
well,
cost.
can't do that. Yeah, can't double the price. Can't do that, so we came up with a solution which interpolated between the positions computed on one frame and one computed a 30th of a second later, and plunked it in the middle, so that, and that
did it.
That did it. You were talking about personal interest things, and this may be way off, but there's one that was strongly affected my wife, and that was to get this thing done on time. We'd work on hardware during the day and software at night. And there were only 4 of us working on this thing, and to get the software done, it was back in the days when we were working with punch paper tape, and I ended up taking home 3 TI 980, I think it was, computers, disconnecting the dryer at home to get 220 volts and connected up these computers and had them running all night long with paper tape off reels into waste baskets, and then you'd roll it back up and run it through again for, it was a two-pass compiler. And that that was one that
I had not, that's interesting. I had not known that. I had not known that. How hard that was. Yep.
There were fun times. I mean, it was exciting and it was intense. 9 months to get a product like that out with 4 people working, having to develop a display with another vendor, that was totally different.
Yes,
uh,
yes.
With Kratos.
Yep, yeah, the display was on that was calligraphic, meaning, you know, plotted points.
And it could do a very limited color rendition by changing the accelerating voltage
Yes.
and penetrating through the layers of colored phosphor.
But the reason that that was used is in those days, raster displays had not reached raster color displays had not reached the level of technology that they are now. I mean, you look at the Retina display and you say, oh, and I think that if I were a calligraphic tube manufacturer, I think I would have started to retrench because I bet they're not selling very many of those. But it was necessary to get the quality that they wanted of the light points to use the calligraphic displays, which were very expensive and so forth. But that's the same TI 980 computer that Bob was
about.
Yeah, said, you should use a DEC computer or something. So anyway, we had success with that. We delivered it. They liked the solution. They bought off. We delivered the rest of them on time. We sold another 2 to UTA. We lost at SAS. We sold, let's see, who else? There was something else that was bought around that
There were
time.
originally 9 or something.
I thought so, yeah. And it's not terribly important, but so it put us on the map is the real issue, and the development when we had done the contract, we after we got all this stuff, we were actually very pregnant when we decided to get married. We did a collaborative agreement after all this was happening, and in the
with Redifine.
With Redifine.
Yeah.
And yes, and I remember negotiating that with Roy McClanagan in the Hotel Utah. Oh my gosh, I hadn't thought about that in years. Anyway, so we sat down in this hotel and drafted this agreement, signed it. The Redifine management had no idea we were doing it. The ENS management had no idea we were doing it. We just did it because it seemed like something that should be reduced to a contract. And as part of it, I had suggested that in addition to buying these things at a sales price, the image generators, that they fund the development costs for a limited part of the development costs for a while, which they did. So the key thing there is that the company, for the first time ever, at the end of 1973, reported a slight profit. And it had been losing money for the previous, since 1968, it was running a loss. So anyway, that started the Novue thing, which grew and developed and improved, and I mean, it became something that was lovely and continues this day, actually, not as NovaView and not under ENS auspices, but the same people who carried that along for many years through ENS are now employees of Rockwell Collins.
Yeah.
Bought the simulation division from ENS well after Bob and I had left.
Can you talk about the context of the oil embargo that made it possible?
Oh, yes.
Some of the historical elements.
Bob
Also, before you start that,
Mhm.
pulling in some of the NASA, the oil embargo sort of launched things, gave you reason to develop this further, but also, or gave reason for others to want to buy it. But also, how does NASA, with what you did with NASA and NASA's seed money going into all of this, you had mentioned that at lunch.
Oh.
And how this might be a good place to kind of pull those ties together.
It'll definitely be the place to pull the oil embargo thing in.
Mhm.
It may be that there's a better place to slip that in.
Good.
It's sort of, I think, almost, Stephen, at the end.
Okay.
I think if you say, here's the story, our story,
Mhm.
and if you look back at the criticality of various events that occurred, one of the things that was so terribly important in all of this was the early Jan Air, NASA government money that was going into R&D at that time, because without that, we'd be having a different meeting now, or no meeting at all. So I think that might be the time to bring that in. But oil embargo, you covered that at lunch. Why don't you take the, what was
Yeah.
important about this? Give a.
Yeah, I think one of the major impetus for doing the computer-generated displays and being able to get the training, the additional training credits from the FAA or the equivalent international organizations was the fact that the cost of fuel, both for everybody, including jet fuel, was going sky high. The Arabs shut down the oil supply, and the costs of training were just escalating. And as the FAA began to realize the potential of some of these very simple, night-only, light point-oriented displays for training, they began to grant credits for training for different phases of the operation that they didn't have to conduct in the airplane. And airlines would conduct training in off-revenue hours, which meant anywhere from very late at night to crack of dawn. And it got to be very expensive to do that with the cost of oil. Not only that, there's the safety aspect, in that they would train in whatever emergencies they thought they could reasonably do in the airplane without endangering folks too much in the training community. But there was still a lot that they wished they could train that was just not safe to do in the airplane. So between the view of additional training being available and the cost benefits of being able to do it more and more on a simulator, it turned out that providing the additional visual equipment to let them get these credits paid for itself in well less than a year. So airlines were just clamoring on board to go and do this. That whole aviation, commercial aviation oriented line sort of grew in parallel with the big daylight stuff that was NASA and others along the way. And there was a cross-fertilization where we developed concepts in the daylight realm, and then take some of that technology and filter it back into the low-cost line where we could incorporate it. And eventually the airline systems rivaled the big daylight systems in many respects in terms of image quality and complexity. So the daylight systems developed more along the lines of military requirements later on, which are quite different from the airlines. But these two product lines existed in parallel for a very long time, and they did cross-feed technology to one another.
Yeah. To put a number on the economics of that, airline empty airplane costs, I think in those days were running about $10,000 an hour, and you'll remember the numbers better than I, but there were a number of maneuvers, a number of exercises that you could remove from the airplane and put in the simulator, and these were things I think the pilots had to go through this maybe twice a year, the checks. And so you could take every pilot twice a year, and maybe they were getting, I don't know, 6 hours or something out of the number you'll remember better. 6 to 10.
Typically they'd take two pilots up on a training run, and they'd have one observe and the other do, or there'd be the co-pilot and do and then they'd swap.
And about how many hours came out?
2 or 3 at a session was about all people could stand.
But if you multiply those numbers out, the key number is Bob's, which is they could buy the equipment, install it, operate it, and it would pay for itself, in 6 to 9 months. And I guess the other thing that we were quite excited about was there were many simulators that airlines owned Some of them had these camera model board systems, but not many. The rest of them had not quite cardboard, but their windscreens were covered. They were opaque. And so they were doing no out the window visual training for the pilots then, but the simulators were there. They were on motion platforms. They met all the other requirements. And so by doing this, what was a fairly minor investment of about $1 million, I guess, per airplane,
The whole
to put
works, yeah.
the whole thing on the visual on. You take the cardboard off, put that thing on there, and so they were. You remember the shovel-ready concept when we were going through the depths of the big cutback in 07 and 08. So we had shovel-ready stuff. These were cockpit-ready for visual things, and we had something that could be built. We had technology. It could be built rapidly. It could be delivered rapidly. It was easy to install. It didn't mess up anything else, and so sold a lot of them, and it was very helpful because, as Bob says, there was not only cross-fertilization from a technological standpoint, but it was producing funds that we're using to develop to take risks on some of these big military things, which Bob's going to describe. I think probably it's about time to get into the military marketplace, if you want to take that one.
Yeah,